Now for the second part of this fun little exercise here. Um, and remember that what I was saying earlier was that T cells define adaptive immune memory. That whole letter was about the idea that T cells define adaptive immune memory. And so, what I find interesting about the next guy that I want to discuss, this YouTube videos that actually make the cut. This is a YouTube video that makes the cut. It's not going to get deleted, but it's a YouTube video that I think is 100% bullshit. And it is spectacular because our friend and biologist, who's going to take us through why Gerard van den Bosch is apparently wrong, is also a PhD biologist and also comes at it from the same sort of angle that I'm coming at it from. That he purports to have read a lot. He purports to be a biologist and understand how immunity works. And therefore, he's able to sort through the nonsense on the internet. And he has a whole YouTube channel, complete with cool thumbnails and everything, that where he debunks coronavirus misinformation. And so I think that he would love to debunk me because I'm one of these promoters of Gerard van den Bosch. So I just thought I have not seen more than 2 minutes of this video. I swear, I promise you this. I only needed to see 2 minutes of the video after my viewer sent it to me to know that I could use it for this exercise. So what you're going to see live on television is the actual reaction that I have to this video. I've only know one part that's coming. He did make a diagram which is so good and he uses it so badly. It's almost, it is the YouTube equivalent of taking a loaded rifle, explaining the safety mechanisms, and then shooting yourself in the head on camera. It's brilliant. So once I saw that, I knew that the rest of the 15 minutes must contain gold as well. So hopefully there will be some more fun stuff, but for sure there's one thing. It's not long video. It's only a few 15 minutes or so. So we'll be done by the end of the hour, and you can get on with your evening or whatever, and then I can get back to work on finishing the things I promised to be done a while ago, which is also the original slides for that last talk, which I keep referring to because those slides, it's hard to really explain how ridiculously difficult it is to make a cohesive set of PDFs from highly animated slides that I'm using here. It's a lot of annoying work, and it's a waste of time in a way because in the end I'm just going to give those slides away, and then it's the talk I'm already done. So, but I want to do it because they have all of the citations and everything, and you can have it for posterity. You can share it with your friends. You can take notes while I'm talking. You can give it to other people, etc. So it's not that I'm not going to do it. I'm just again making excuses for why the damn thing's not done yet, and I am ashamed that I'm making those excuses. So here's the guy. He's called Debunk the Funk with Dr. Wilson. Now I think that's kind of dope. Defunk the bunk, debunk the funk with Dr. Wilson, and he's got this real nice. I'm gonna go back later, but he's got this real nice little thumbnail here with his cartoon head, and then each of these videos has a really cool thumbnail with his cartoon head. So it's a pretty well done, I think, a pretty well done little operation he's got here.
Hi, I'm Dr. Wilson. I'm a PhD molecular biologist, and welcome to another COVID-19 debunking video. In this video, I'm going to be revisiting an old friend, Ert van... Hi, I'm Dr. Wilson. I'm a PhD molecular biologist, and welcome to another COVID-19 debunking video. In this video, I'm going to be revisiting an old friend, Ert van den Bosch. Dr. van den Bosch is a PhD in virology and a doctor of veterinary science, who earlier in the pandemic became a hero of COVID conspiracy theorists when he claimed that COVID vaccination would be really bad for everybody. I made a video about those ideas several months ago, but now that the COVID vaccines are much more widespread, I figured I'd check in on him and his ideas and see how he's doing. So let's get started. Now, the video I'm covering today is his most recent video on his YouTube channel, which is about 30 minutes long. But in the first 5 minutes or so, he goes over a bunch of what he calls positive news about COVID vaccines, which include the facts that COVID vaccines have reduced the morbidity and mortality rates of COVID-19, as well as the transmission. These facts are all true, and I was genuinely surprised to see him acknowledge all of it. But To my disappointment, well, you'll see.
Despite all this good news, and these are facts and data, why then am I saying that this pandemic is not at all moving into the right direction?
Yep, he still doesn't think that COVID vaccines are a good idea. Let's hear his reasoning.
And so when you combine all these factors, the low infectious pressure or the lowest infectious pressure due to mass vaccination, combined with the fact that the asymptomatically infected vaccinees can still spread the virus, and this combined with suboptimal immune pressures, this makes, in fact, of vaccinees a kind of reservoir where the virus can circulate and where variants that have mutations that enable them to become more infectious, that enable the variant to become more infectious, will have a competitive advantage.
Okay, so that clip is him summarizing about 15 minutes worth of his video. So let's break it down. All of his claims come down to this idea that SARS-CoV-2 can persist and replicate in the body of a vaccinated person longer than it can an unvaccinated person, all the while developing mutations that can help it evade the immune system. So the question that we can ask is, how does the viral dynamics of a SARS-CoV-2 infection look in a vaccinated person versus an unvaccinated
I
person?
wonder what data
And
he's going to
when
show
we
here.
do that, when
Oh,
we
of
do the
course he
experiments to find
does.
that answer, we see that vaccinated people clear the virus faster than unvaccinated.
Do you guys remember when we discussed this paper in our talk? I've not seen this before. It's pretty shocking. Remember what I told you about this paper that was weak? Was that they were averaging all the zeros in to the green line and they're averaging all the zeros into the red line. And so then they pull the green line down by averaging these zeros in. But if you take all these zeros out, where people, for whatever reason, despite the vaccination, still repel the virus, and you just focus on these green that are above here, then you can see that the greens that are actually still carrying virus are still carrying virus loads equivalent to those people who are unvaccinated. The second thing that our molecular biologist friend is probably going to ignore, although he might mention it yet, is that the unvaccinated people are orders of magnitude more likely to actually get sick, whereas the vaccinated people are not going to get sick, which he sees as a bonus. But actually, Gerhardt is trying to explain that asymptomatic carrying of the virus is actually the most dangerous kind of spreading because it is spreading virus that can replicate in the presence of the vaccinated antibody set. So again, let's hear the doctor continue to debunk the funk. I mean, he's not debunking it, but let's hear it.
People. What this all essentially boils down to is the fact that SARS-CoV-2 does not have as good of a time replicating in the body of a vaccinated person versus an unvaccinated person.
Okay, so what else do we know about that, right? I mean, come on, let's just go back. Let's just talk, right? Dr. Funk. Let's just see if we can show some alternative interpretations. What's this data tell you there, Dr. Funk? I wonder what you would think about this data that shows that there's no difference between the viral loads and in fact the vaccinated carry a slightly higher load. I wonder if he's even seen this paper, right? Maybe he hasn't seen this paper. Maybe he hasn't seen this one that has two different data sets that show exactly the same thing from two different places in California. I'm sure he hasn't seen this stuff. Otherwise, he wouldn't be acting so ridiculously confident about the biology he purports to know. So again, a molecular biologist with a PhD who's extremely confident he knows what he's talking about. So confident that he's willing to do a YouTube video about a guy who used to work for Gavi, who is both a veterinarian and a PhD vaccinologist immunologist, with over 20 years experience working for Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation under Gavi and other organizations. And he thinks that with his molecular biology background and his bookshelf, he is able to debunk the funk that Gerhard von den Bosch is throwing. And I've just shown you that with this first reference, he's already revealed how weak his immunology is, but I assure you it's going to get much better. Oh my gosh, because what I saw with the little sample that I took in the middle of the video, it was spectacular. So it's coming.
In the body of a vaccinated person, SARS-CoV-2 will replicate less. That
Ah,
means it will have fewer
ah,
chances to develop
ah.
mutations that allow it to evade an immune system.
This is another gross misunderstanding about the biology here. It's made by a lot of biologists because evolution is hard. And if you're not an evolutionary biologist or you haven't read enough about it and really understand it, you don't get the fact that you don't create mutations by putting pressure on the virus. The pressure selects for already existing mutations. That's the reason why having a bunch of infections all around the world creates this huge genetic diversity. And that genetic diversity doesn't really matter until you put a single sieve with the same shape in every person, like the spike protein immunization is. Dr. Funk is not debunking the funk or whatever he's doing. He's not doing it. He is showing exactly how well he has managed to adapt his very focused and limited molecular biology. I don't know what his expertise is, but his expertise is not immunology, it's molecular biology, and that could mean anything, but it probably means he knows how to do a mini prep. It probably means he knows how to do a few restriction enzyme digests and he's run a few gels, and maybe he's followed a few proteins in terms of their expression in the brain or something like that. But he's not what Gerard van den Bosch brings to the table. And so the arrogance that is displayed here is pretty disturbing because he is working under the assumption that he's 100% right and Gerard is 100% wrong. And imagine the spectacular ego that you would have to assume that someone with at least the same credentials as you is a bona fide idiot, because that's how he's talking right now. And he will continue to talk, which is pretty spectacular.
So, right away, that idea just doesn't check out at all. Vaccinated people are not variant factories. They are making it harder for SARS-CoV-2 to form new variants.
People who are not vaccinated and healthy, they are perfectly capable of coping with all these variants because their natural antibodies, their innate antibodies, do not discriminate between those variants.
And so this is where he starts to get even more ridiculous. He thinks that vaccine-induced immunity is going to apply too much selective pressure to SARS-CoV-2, and that's going to make it evolve new, more dangerous variants.
Now, let's just stop him right here because I just want to make sure that you're aware of what I showed you last week, right? And what I showed you last week was, and he might not be aware of it because he's not paying attention like I am. But what I showed you last week was Trevor Bedford's lab's analysis of the next strain data and the analysis which showed not only convergent evolution upon introduction of the immunizations, but most importantly, it shows that the gene of S1, the protein of S1, is actually mutating at an unnatural rate. He just said there in that previously quoted line that even the most wildly mutating protein is usually not above 1, and this one has now reached a stage of 2. And so I would be interested to know what Dr. Funk has to say about that, because I'm sure that he's not aware of it. Otherwise, he wouldn't be walking into this chipper shredder right now that he's walking into, because he is saying that Gerard van den Bosch sounds ridiculous. And what Gerard van den Bosch gets wrong is due to what I would call it's a language barrier. He's a Dutch guy. He speaks Dutch. And when he says natural antibodies, what he's really talking about is the complement system. And what he's saying is the complement system the virus can be disguised from the complement system by the antibodies to the off-target antibodies to the spike and make it harder for the complement system to eliminate the virus. And so therefore, higher viral loads can be reached because these off-target antibodies protect the virus from the complement system. The complement system being the natuurlijk antibodies, natuurlijk, hoe zeg je dat nou in Nederlands? it's something Stoff. I don't remember anymore what they're called, but there is a Dutch word for them for the complement system, and so Gerhardt keeps getting it mixed up, and even Sukrit says that he's wrong about that. He says that wrong, but the correction that this guy thinks that he's making is not a suitable correction, and you'll see as we move forward how off this gentleman really is.
Somehow those rules don't apply to this innate immune system that he's talking about, and the way he's talking about innate immunity here is not correct. Innate immunity does not involve antibodies. Antibodies are part of the adaptive immune response. He's not.
And that's what I'm correcting him here is that when he says innate antibodies, what he's talking about is the complement system. And so this guy is correct that Gerhardt is wrong here, but he's not correct in the sense of what Gerhardt really means. And if Gerhardt would ever let me interview him, which you could try and encourage through emailing, we could correct some of this stuff, right? Because this is the problem. If you're not a general biologist and you don't know all of this wide range of biology, which this guy clearly doesn't, then you can very easily trick yourself into believing, I got him on this one. I remember, here's a figure that shows that he's wrong. Look, see, here's a figure that shows that he's wrong. Antibodies are on this side of the diagram, not on this side of the diagram. And so he thinks he's all a genius now.
Immune response. He's not really getting his terminology correct. And just to add to that, he says that these innate antibodies that are in naive individuals who have never seen SARS-CoV-2 don't discriminate against variants? What? No, the serum of naive individuals who have never seen SARS-CoV-2 don't have antibodies that can neutralize variants. That's because the adaptive immune system needs to see something before it knows how to fight it.
So again, here you see him trapped in this IgG, our antibodies. IgG, our antibodies. What is he talking about here? He's looking at antibodies that neutralize the spike protein, which I've explained to you for weeks is not the primary mechanistic response to coronaviruses, but because his molecular biology is so limited to whatever he studied and whatever he's read in the last textbook that he found, and because he's not reading all of the papers that I've been reading for the last year and a half, he has not given himself a master's degree in immunology. He has given himself a master's degree in TV immunomythology. Because all the time he's been talking so far, 5 minutes, he hasn't talked about T cells once. Not yet.
Said it before and I'll say it again. This is the quality of the heroes propped up by COVID conspiracy theorists. It's just sad.
No, actually what's really sad is you thinking that you are biologically beating Gerhard von den Bosch. What's sad is that this guy actually believes what he's saying wholeheartedly and is proud of it, shares it. You need to help me get this guy on my show so that we can try to educate him to what he's wrong. What's wrong with what he's saying? I have all the papers queued up. I have all the slides queued up. I can pull up anything that I need to pull up while this this guy is talking, and we can straighten him up. But this is some serious violation of this is sad. And he says it's sad. That's the point, right? That social media and TV has allowed this guy to watch some videos and think that he understands this immunology. And he's convinced himself because both channels agreed and that YouTube guy. I don't watch people on YouTube. I don't learn my immunology from YouTube. I read paper after paper after paper, follow bibliography backwards after bibliography backwards until I get to the stage where I understand why that assertion was made or why it's not true. And then there are biologists like this guy who take the word of the television, the newspapers, the Facebook threads, and the YouTube channels and try to come up with a cohesive summary of what Vice and PBS NewsHour think you need to know about coronavirus, and this makes sense to him. We need to save people like this because he should know better, but he doesn't. Either he didn't have an Immunology 101 class or his Immunology 101 lecturer was crap. Because I had a wonderful Immunology 101 lecturer.
And it's very clear that the more youngsters and the more children you will enroll in those campaigns, the more the increased susceptibility of the non-vaccinated group will outweigh, in fact, the benefit of vaccinating the elderly and the vulnerable people.
What? No, and that's why we want to vaccinate those age groups. Unvaccinated people are free real estate for SARS-CoV-2 to infect, replicate, continue evolving.
And remember what I suggested to you and have showed you with actual evidence from the literature from many, many, many years of studying viral evolution and grass evolution and insect evolution, that these guys, these viruses are moving as swarms. And so each individual natural infection is a unique bottleneck, whereas each immunized infection is not a unique bottleneck, and therefore anything that escapes an immunized person will be able to infect other immunized people because their immune response has been homogenized to the spike protein. He doesn't understand that, and he's going to explain how badly he doesn't understand it with a graphic that he's created himself.
Continue forming new variants. That's why we want to vaccinate them, not only to protect them against the rare cases of disease that we see in young children, but also to prevent this virus from continuing to evolve and continuing to be a problem in society. But Ert van den Bosch doesn't want that.
No, because Gerard van den Bosch understands how evolution works. And Gerard van den Bosch may have seen the data that actually supports his assertions that he's been making since December, which have come out of Trevor Bedford's lab. Please come on my show, Dr. Funk, and let's talk about this data and see if you can debunk it.
So, what does this mean when we now do the mathematics and the calculations?
He doesn't have any math or calculations. He just has this graph that he drew by hand with no numbers that he actually plugged into it. This graph is not based on any science. He literally made it up.
No, he didn't. He's an epidemiologist, and there are lots of papers about it. You just haven't looked them up. And he's summarizing a 2-decade career in immunology and epidemiology as best he can, whereas you are criticizing him as though he's pulling it out of thin air after working in a gas station. Come on, dude. Come on. I don't think you can actually be this arrogant. I think you're doing it for views or something else because you don't know what you're talking about, and you are also not citing any papers which show counterpoints to what Gerard is saying. It's shocking.
No, now, interestingly enough, after we have started vaccination, we no longer test healthy people. Although all we have been doing is turning these healthy people into vaccinees, into healthy vaccinees. So why all of a sudden we do not longer test vaccinees, healthy vaccinees?
We are. The CDC recommends that even a fully vaccinated person who comes into contact with a confirmed COVID case is recommended to get tested 3 to 5 days after their exposure. If they test positive, then the CDC has a policy where they ask clinical laboratories to send them those positive samples for sequencing so that they can track variants that may be.
This is actually a lie. They only changed that very recently, and they are still not requesting the sequencing of any positive results from vaccinated people unless they are in the hospital. So again, the guy's just wrong. And that's really unfortunate because, again, his arrogance is just dripping from the screen.
Infecting vaccinated people.
What I was saying, we are still having the suboptimal conditions, so now the virus will be able to overcome this higher level of immune pressure, which will ultimately lead, in fact, to resistance of the vaccines and the resistance of the virus towards the vaccine. And that is what, if we continue this mass vaccination, I'm sure will happen.
I'm sure it will happen if we stop a mass vaccination
Here it
and just
comes.
let the virus spread.
Here it comes.
This idea of vaccine resistance is something that he posted a while ago when he made his LinkedIn post. He even likened it to how bacteria develop antibiotic resistance. This is completely wrong, and here's why. When a bacteria develops resistance to
Here
an
it comes.
antibiotic drug,
He's
it's
citing
because
Andrew
that
Reid.
drug targets
Yahoo!
one particular thing in the bacteria. If
Yep.
the bacteria mutates that thing that the antibiotic targets,
Yep.
it can become resistant.
Yep.
Doctors can get around this by administering multiple antibiotics
Yep.
to the same patient.
Yep.
This way, there are multiple things in the bacteria that are each targeted by a single antibiotic. The bacteria is much less likely to develop mutations in all of those targets at the same time. So, this is much more effective when it comes to preventing resistance. Now, when it comes to vaccines, it is incorrect to think of the vaccine as one drug the same way we think of an antibiotic as one drug.
Here it
The reason is
comes.
because it's not the vaccine itself that's doing the work to protect you, it's your immune system.
Oh.
When your immune system mounts an immune response to the contents of the vaccine,
What happens?
you will end up producing multiple different antibodies and multiple different T cells that all recognize a specific site on, in this case, the spike protein, which is what ultimately is
He said
delivered to
T
you
cells.
by the
Spike
vaccine.
protein T cells.
In other words, the protein would have to mutate multiple different sites in order to evade a polyclonal immune response. Couple that with the fact that T cells, which are really important cells that patrol your body and remove virus-infected cells, will also be able to recognize that spike protein in ways that are different from the antibodies. And the ways that T cells will recognize this spike protein is different from person to person.
Wow, what is he talking about? Does he know what he's talking about? I don't think he does. I think he's just bullshitting right now. He's just getting on the edge of his knowledge and he doesn't know what he's talking about anymore. So T cells will be different in different people. He doesn't know that T cells come before B cells that come before antibodies. He doesn't know that T cell epitopes are selected before the antibody epitopes are selected. And he has no idea that the T cells that are being stimulated are already memory T cells from previous coronaviruses, like we've talked about from many papers that we've discussed over the past weeks. This man is literally clueless because he's only been watching television and working on his little molecular biology project in his lab, whatever he does as a postdoc. This is very disturbing because this is actually the state of the entire academic biology in America. At the University of Pittsburgh, Stanford, anywhere you go, you will have hallways full of people like this who think they know the biology backwards and forwards, who actually believe that this picture describes immunity that cannot be avoided because when the spike protein can't change all those things at once. He's completely unaware somehow that these off-target antibodies do not neutralize the virus, do not call in the immune system, and do not enable macrophages to uptake the virus. And in fact, the only antibodies that actually matter that target the spike protein are those antibodies which can block the receptor binding domain. And the rest of these antibodies have a propensity to stabilize the spike protein in its open binding configuration, making the virus more infectious. He's used a figure which describes antibody-dependent enhancement as an argument for the effectiveness of polyclonal antibodies. It's absolutely absurd. And he's talked about T-cell immunity to the spike protein with complete naivety to the idea that the spike protein is the last protein made and the least effective T-cell target for immunity. We have shown time and time again that we are using T-cell immunity to the ORF1ab protein, polyprotein targets, and the N protein because these are functionally constrained proteins that haven't changed much over the course of the millions of years of coronavirus evolution and thus are much better targets than the spike protein. The only reason why antibodies to the spike protein are relevant is because these are the only immune markers produced by Moderna and Pfizer's products. This guy is lost.
Different T cells that all recognize a specific site on, in this case, the spike protein, which is what ultimately is delivered to you by the vaccine. In other words, the protein would have to mutate multiple different sites in order to evade a polyclonal immune response. Couple that with the fact that T cells, which are really important cells that patrol your body and remove virus-infected cells,
Really
will
important.
also be able to recognize that spike protein in ways that are different from the antibodies. And the ways that T cells will recognize this spike protein is different from person to person. So, all of this is to say that the virus has to mutate a lot in order to escape the immune system.
See, his primary misunderstanding here is that off-target antibodies do anything. It's such a spectacular misunderstanding that is perpetuated by everything that PBS NewsHour, Vice, Bill Gates, any production video I've ever shown you from mainstream media or Facebook has purported to perpetuate the same nonsense, that the more antibodies that you make to the spike protein, the better. The more antibodies, the better. It doesn't matter where they're aimed. As long as they're aimed at the spike protein, it's great. And the more you make, the harder it is for it to mutate. That is absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And what's even crazier is he doesn't understand that the S1 subunit goes into circulation after mRNA and transfection. And so your immune system is much more likely to respond to it because it's in circulation as opposed to tied to the membrane of random cells throughout your body, which it also will respond to. A spectacular level of misunderstanding at a spectacular level of academic biology. This guy should be on my team, but instead I am one of the very few people that has been kicked out of academia for understanding the immunology of coronavirus infection sufficiently not to fall into this bullshit trap. Sorry. I'm just shocked. I didn't think it was going to be this good.
All of that mutation needs replication and time. Vaccines take away both replication and time.
No,
from
they
the
don't.
Virus. That's why vaccination is the only way out of this pandemic.
And then some people say, well, you know, there is the cellular immunity that is cross-protective, etc. No, because people who are vaccinated, they are not primed for these protective cellular responses. The vaccines do not induce cell-mediated immunity that is protective and that is capable of eliminating virus-infected cells.
Hang on, he thinks that vaccines don't elicit cellular immunity?
And they don't, because they are stimulating previous B cell memory. That's why you see IgG. That's the only way you can get IgG, and that is a T cell independent activation. It is very likely that very few T cells are activated by the injection by mRNA. And what he's also talking about here is the interference of the spike protein antibodies with the interferon signal, which does actually interfere with the way that cells call in the immune system, and that's also a problem. Again, it's partly a language thing. He's Dutch, and he's holding him to a very high level of language specificity and a very high technical language situation.
This is measured. Yes, they do. Ever since the first phase 3 clinical trials of COVID vaccines last April, we've known that they do elicit cellular immunity, and he's just denying it.
And last
April, we've known that they do elicit cellular immunity, and he's just denying it. Don't elicit cellular immunity.
Do not induce cell-mediated immunity that is protective and that is capable of eliminating
Did I just catch him on something here?
cells.
Hang on, he thinks that vaccines don't elicit cellular immunity? This is measured. Yes, they do. Ever since the first phase 3 clinical trials of COVID vaccines
That's
last
not
April,
to the vaccine,
we've
you
known
frickin'
that they
idiot.
do-
That's to the infection, you frickin' idiot. That's not to the vaccine. Is he really serious? We review studies, T-cell epitopes, 25 studies, size, antigen, epitopes recognize, has implications for vaccine design. This has absolutely nothing to do with vaccine stimulation. See how much of a clown this is? He can't even read the citations that he's doing. There's no vaccination in this paper. What kind of nonsense is this guy trying to pull over on us? Holy crap.
Elicit cellular immunity, and he's just denying it.
And last but not least, we need to work on a new type of vaccines, not the type of second generation of vaccines, because they won't help. They have the same problem. But a type of vaccines that is first not interfering with the immunity of the COVID-19 vaccinees, and that is capable of inducing sterilizing immunity.
Okay, so first of all, COVID vaccines do grant sterilizing immunity to an individual. But
Yeah,
sterilizing immunity
sure they do.
does not last.
Oh,
Because
I
after
see.
you become immune to something, after your body mounts an immune response, your sterilizing immunity is sterilizing only because you have high levels of antibodies
Oh,
circulating throughout
see
your body.
again,
Those
antibodies.
levels will wane
Yeah.
over time, no matter what. But
Holy
you are left
balls.
with immune memory. You are left with the ability to mount an immune response much faster the next time you see that foreign antigen. Second, the idea that vaccine-induced immunity somehow interferes with other forms of immunity, that's not a thing. That just doesn't happen. He has simply made that up. There's no evidence to suggest that idea.
So this is pretty spectacular because actually we have discussed two papers recently that show that the activation of previous immune memory is the source of the immune responses to infection. And so the idea of what he's talking about here, let's listen again exactly what he says so I can get the wording exactly right.
Induced immunity somehow interferes with other forms of immunity, that's not a thing.
So this is a problem because actually this not a thing is coming from his misunderstanding that the mRNA transfection is somehow methodologically equivalent to traditional vaccination, and that's one of the key themes in that doctor's letter that I read to you today. It is not at all equivalent, and the possibilities are nearly endless. We're not really sure what happens when we transfect people with a viral protein, and we are not sure if we are activating previously encoded B cell memories, which can be affinity enriched during their exposure to new infections. So what we could be doing is taking a set of B cells, which are highly diverse, focused on various spike proteins from various endemic previous coronaviruses, and taking all of those B cells and then clouding that population with an enriched portion to the S1 subunit of 2020, which then when we meet a subsequent coronavirus, all of those B cells will start spitting out antibodies, which he thinks is going to be a better, faster immune response when they see the antigen again. But it will actually be a giant, overwhelming, redundant antibody response, which will lessen the effect of the complement system on circulating virus, which means that higher viral loads will be possible. Also, the possibility of stabilizing the spike protein in its furin cleavage open position, because off-target antibodies do that, shown in at least 3 papers. So again, the kinds of things that he is dismissing as not a thing just means that he hasn't ever heard of them before, hasn't read the papers which describe the mechanisms which lead to these possibilities. And again, it's arrogance, because having someone with 20 years experience tell you about what's happening and then you assume that they must be an idiot is exactly the kind of arrogance that's occurring across the board, all across America, all across the world, at every college, every university, every medical school, where they're not having an active debate about the dangers of this vaccine. And that's because everyone assumes that they know that antibodies do it, that the vaccines create antibodies, and vaccines are vaccines are vaccines, and viruses are viruses are viruses. We have to break this spell. It is people like this, and there are thousands of these people just in Pittsburgh alone, maybe hundreds, of PhDs, active biologists working in all fields at the University of Pittsburgh, at Carnegie Mellon, at Duquesne University, And the vast majority of them would agree with Dr. Funk's debunking the funk. And this is the reason why America is in trouble. This is the reason why GigaOhm Biological exists. This is the reason why you need to support the stream, because we will not survive as a nation. Our children will not grow up in a normal country if we are not willing to fight this and fight for our rights to determine what happens to our children. And the only way we can do that is to teach our children from the youngest to the oldest the real immunology 101, which this guy, Dr. Funk, doesn't know. He doesn't know that all viruses are not the same to our immune system. He has no idea the difference between live attenuated vaccines and dead and subunit vaccines, and he has no idea that the immunogenicity of the original pathogen determines whether you can develop lifelong sterilizing immunity. Has is very clear from him saying that the immunizations produce sterilizing immunity. It just doesn't last that long. I'm sorry, Dr. Funk, but that's not the definition of sterilizing immunity, you blockhead. Not only that, but we're not all equally vulnerable to coronaviruses. He never talked about that at all, because that also doesn't fit in with his wonderfully PC correct narrative. And finally, antibodies do not equal immunity. How many times do I have to say this, and how many times did he not acknowledge this? These are the three main points going forward. Immunization does not provide better immunity than natural infection. All vaccines are not equally safe and effective, and the mRNA adenovirus spike protein immunizations are not methodologically sound. You can find me on the internet, research me so that you know that I'm not a crazy person. Challenge me and get this guy to debate me or talk to me on my stream so that I can break his illusion that he knows immunology, because I would really like to save him from making a fool of himself any further. I have a YouTube channel that I'm going to start putting videos on, and I also have a website that I'm going to populate. Besides this, I'm also going to have, what do I have to do with this? I'm also going to have this letter, which is a draft letter to my doctor. I'm going to finish it. I promise it's going to be done as soon as possible, along with the citations that go with it. And then those citations will be then on the website here on this page marked papers, and then they'll also be in the letter will be at the top, and then the papers that support it will be under here, and then they'll also be listed in the bibliography. This is one of the first kind of resources that I want to produce, but then we're also going to put the stream from 2 days ago up on a separate page here, probably in some kind of stream archive, or I don't know what I'm going to call it yet. And then there, the slides from that you're looking at now here will be available for download, so that you can make notes on the slides. You can see the papers and the figures that I'm referencing up close, and so that you can share that slide set with people. So maybe they'll look through the papers first, and then maybe after they've seen the slide set and are curious, you can then give them the link to the video, which discusses the whole slide set. And then the slide set should give you a place where you can take notes, you can keep track of your questions, and you can help give me feedback, so that as I produce the next slide deck that will push this forward, that we know what we're going to be covering. So this has been GigaOhm Biological. It's a high-resistance, low-noise news stream brought to you by a biologist. That biologist is me behind the sign here. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for being here. It has been a lot of fun talking with this guy. Debunking the funk was a nice little video. Thanks very much for sharing it with me. It really gave me some material where maybe I needed it, because I was still not done with the letter and focused mostly on that this weekend. So did I not put the people at the end again? Because that would be kind of annoying if I didn't put the people at the end. I did not put the people at the end. So I'm going to escape, and then I'm going to that didn't what I want to do. I'm going to escape that, and then I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to say thank you once again, and I'm going to remind you all that this, unlike the PBS NewsHour, GigaOhm Biological is brought to you only by viewers like you. The viewers that support this stream are listed here on this screen. If you are not listed yet, it is because I'm a loser and I have not put your name there yet, and I will do so in the next couple days. It doesn't look like a very complicated diagram, but because there is some scaling as to the amount of support, as you can probably guess, then there is some method to the madness which doesn't lend itself very well to adding all kinds of new names very quickly. So it's a couple hours work to fix this up and make sure that everybody's name is visible, including the people behind me. Thank you all very much for supporting the stream. If you can, please do so and continue to do so. But the best way to support the stream is simply to share it with your family and friends and then leave the rest to me. Because I think that everybody that's experienced the awakening that occurs when you start to understand your own biology is willing to at least buy me a coffee. And as long as people keep buying me coffees, I'm going to keep being okay. So thank you very much for joining me. I will see you tomorrow night, same time, same channel for another stream. We're going to cover a few new papers tomorrow night. We're going to kind of line up and announce the announcement of the website changes and the doctor's notes and the PDFs that I've been promising you. And then we're going to take our next step forward, which is starting to talk about how we can do a real newsletter besides the slides that will kind of keep us up to date weekly with the stream on Saturday. So again, lots of plans going forward, lots of things I'm trying to improve. I hope you understand that I am very grateful for all of your patience as this stream has tried to become more professional and more, let's say, give more back to you on a regular basis. So again, thank you for your patience, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night. Thank you very much for joining me. Bye-bye.